Welcome to the debate. Today we plunge into, really one of the most compelling and morally challenging narratives from the first book of Nephi. Our source material, excerpts from this foundational text, introduces us to the patriarch Lehi and his family as they depart Jerusalem and embark on an arduous journey through the wilderness. This epic tale is punctuated by significant challenges and, critically, by profound divine commands they receive, particularly those directed towards Lehi's son, Nephi. Today, we're zeroing in on a pivotal and, frankly, ethically complex event: Nephi's slaying of a powerful, resistant figure named Laban to obtain the plates of brass, ancient records believed absolutely crucial for his people's spiritual survival and preservation. The central question we'll grapple with is this: was Nephi's slaying of Laban, an act he recounts as commanded by the Spirit, a morally justifiable action for the greater good of his people? Or did it represent a problematic transgression of a fundamental moral law, even with perceived divine sanction? I will be arguing for the justification of Nephi's actions as a necessary divine imperative, a difficult but ultimately righteous choice.
And I, for my part, will be exploring the profound ethical complexities and potential transgressions inherent in this act. It's a moment in the text that truly forces us to confront deeply held moral convictions against what is presented as an undeniable divine command. It really challenges our understanding of obedience and, moral agency.
Indeed, it does. As I read this foundational account, the sequence of events leading up to Nephi's ultimate decision paints a picture of stark necessity and divine imperative. From my perspective, Nephi's actions, though incredibly stark, were fundamentally justifiable. The acquisition of the plates of brass, which contained the law of Moses and a genealogy of my forefathers, along with crucial prophecies, was presented as a critical commandment from the Lord. These ancient texts were essential for the spiritual survival and preservation of Lehi's descendants, preventing them from dwindling and perishing in unbelief and preserving the language of our fathers. And we must remember, Laban wasn't exactly an innocent victim here. He's described in the text as a mighty man, not just wealthy but powerful, who lusted after Lehi's family's property. He had already attempted to slay Laban, Nephi's elder brother, and then later Nephi and his brethren when they tried to retrieve the plates. Crucially, he would not hearken unto the commandments of the Lord. When Nephi eventually encountered Laban drunken and incapacitated, he recounts being constrained by the Spirit that I should kill Laban, what he understood as a direct, undeniable divine prompting. The Spirit didn't mince words, explicitly stating, "The Lord hath delivered him into thy hands." And then came the most powerful and, let's face it, often debated justification. It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. Nephi's action in this light wasn't a personal vendetta or an act of opportunistic violence. It seems presented as a direct divine command, undertaken for the preservation of a righteous future for his entire people, fulfilling the Lord's promise to prepare a way for his commandments to be accomplished. This was framed as a direct existential threat to their spiritual identity and future, demanding a radical response.
I see why you emphasize the urgency and the divine rationale and the paramount importance of those brass plates for Lehi's posterity is certainly undeniable within the narrative. I grant you that. But the act itself, Nephi slaying Laban, raises significant moral questions that we can't easily dismiss, even in the face of a perceived divine command. Consider Nephi's own initial reaction. He shrank and would that I might not slay him, noting with genuine distress that never at any time have I shed the blood of man. This isn't just a moment of hesitation. It indicates a deep-seated moral resistance, a strong internal conflict with a universally recognized moral law, the very thou shalt not kill principle found within the law he was trying to secure. This resistance, this personal conviction, was seemingly overcome only by repeated spiritual promptings that appear to, override his deeply ingrained conscience. Moreover, the precise circumstances of the slaying are crucial. Laban was drunken with wine and incapacitated, having fallen to the earth. He wasn't actively threatening Nephi at that very moment, which significantly complicates the ethical calculus of taking his life, right? And even if we accept the Spirit commanded it, the means employed, the stealthy execution of an unconscious man, followed by Nephi donning Laban's garments and imitating his voice to deceive Zoram, Laban's chief servant, to gain access to the treasury, that could be seen as compromising fundamental moral principles. The text itself states, "The Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes," which implies divine prerogative and ultimate judgment, not necessarily a blanket instruction for human agents to act as executioners, especially when other means of deliverance might have been sought. Think of how the Lord empowered Moses over Pharaoh's armies. Miraculous intervention often didn't require direct human-on-human execution in quite this manner.
I appreciate your insight into Nephi's inner struggle. It's a powerful moment in the text that truly highlights the weight of his decision. Yet, I see that very hesitation not as a sign of a flawed command, but as profound evidence of his ultimate, unwavering obedience to what he understood to be a higher authority. His account emphasizes a direct, unmistakable, and repeated spiritual directive. "The Spirit saith unto me again, slay him, for the Lord hath delivered him into thy hands." This wasn't, as I read it, a subjective interpretation or some vague impression. Nephi himself felt it was a clear, insistent command directly from the Spirit of the Lord, a divine presence and voice he had come to know. Nephi struggled to reconcile this command with his personal moral code, stating he had never at any time shed the blood of man, ultimately demonstrates his immense faith. He overcame his natural aversion, not out of personal desire, but out of a deep understanding that God prepareth a way to accomplish his works, even through difficult and, yes, to human eyes, unsettling means. The command was specific to Laban and the urgent need for the records, distinguishing it from general moral precepts. This was presented as an exceptional circumstance, demanding an exceptional response, where God's will was made abundantly clear, leaving, in Nephi's mind at least, no room for subjective interpretation.
You emphasize Nephi's obedience, and his faith is certainly a cornerstone of his character. I agree. But doesn't his deep-seated moral resistance, the fact he'd never at any time shed the blood of man, actually make us question the clarity of that command? How can we be absolutely sure it wasn't a subjective interpretation under immense pressure, or perhaps even a test of faith that might have had other, less violent resolutions? The Lord had previously spoken to Nephi and his brethren in a still small voice, and through angels to chasten them without commanding violence. Even when Laman and Lemuel were physically smiting Nephi with a rod, an angel appeared and simply declared, "The Lord will deliver Laban into your hands," not explicitly "go and slay him," right? This suggests that divine intervention could manifest in various ways, not always through a direct command for capital punishment by human hands. The justification you cite, that the Lord slayeth the wicked, might be understood as God's ultimate prerogative and judgment, a statement of divine power, not necessarily a human mandate for capital punishment in every instance, especially not against an individual who is drunken with wine and incapacitated, posing no immediate threat. It forces us to ask, at what point does a specific divine command supersede all other moral law? And how can human agents, even prophets, be absolutely sure of their interpretation, particularly when it goes against their deepest moral instincts?
That's a profound question, and it goes right to the heart of what faith and obedience often entail. Trusting in a higher wisdom even when it challenges our own understanding of morality. But in this specific case, the interpretation was made explicit within the narrative itself, providing a clear rationale. The Spirit directly stated, "It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief." This is the core justification, the profound principle of the greater good that, according to the text, governed the entire situation. The plates contained the 5 books of Moses, which included the core law against killing, yes, but also the record of the Jews from the beginning and the prophecies of the holy prophets. Nephi knew, with what he presents as absolute certainty, that without these records, Lehi's descendants would not have the commandments or the foundational knowledge necessary to keep the commandments of the Lord according to the law of Moses. They would quite literally be lost to spiritual oblivion. This was presented as a critical preventative measure for the spiritual salvation and cultural identity of an entire future people. The very law Laban guarded was the law necessary for their existence, making Laban's life a necessary sacrifice for a far greater divine purpose. The preservation of an entire future nation's spiritual well-being was in this context a stark but ultimately righteous decision dictated by divine foresight. The alternative was presented as spiritual oblivion for generations, a fate far more dire than the death of one wicked man.
I acknowledge the dire consequences of losing those records, and the principle that it's better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief is indeed a compelling one. Powerful rhetoric. However, the action of taking a life, especially by one who is meant to be a righteous leader, creates a profound moral paradox. You mentioned the law of Moses, the very law Nephi sought to preserve, which explicitly included the commandment against killing. Is the preservation of the law best achieved by violating one of its core tenets, even if for a perceived greater good? This greater good argument, while powerful in theory, can be a dangerous ethical precedent if not carefully circumscribed. Doesn't it potentially open the door to justify any act, however morally repugnant, if framed as serving a higher purpose? We've seen this argument used throughout history to justify, well, terrible things. Furthermore, the Lord had already shown other miraculous ways of delivering them from danger and providing for them in the wilderness, parting the Red Sea for Moses' people, providing manna in the desert. Why in this specific instance was the direct killing of a man the only way prepared? Why couldn't the Lord simply cause Laban to fall into a deeper sleep, maybe, and allow Nephi to take the plates without bloodshed?
Well, I think that line of reasoning risks overlooking the manifest wickedness of Laban and his active resistance, which made his removal a direct impediment to God's will, as presented in the narrative. Laban wasn't just a stubborn man, he was a mighty man who had explicitly threatened the lives of Lehi's sons, stating, "I will slay thee," and actively sought to destroy them and seize their property. Remember, Nephi and his brothers had already tried peaceful negotiation multiple times, offering all their gold, silver, and precious things for the plates. Laban not only refused, but then attempted to murder them. So given his demonstrated character, his power, and his repeated refusal to hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, his death in this context wasn't merely punitive, but presented as a necessary removal of an active, dangerous impediment to a divine purpose. It prevented him from further wickedness and secured the vital records. The Lord specifically stated, "The Lord hath delivered him into thy hands for this cause, that I might obtain the records." This seems to clarify the divine intent and the instrumental necessity of the act. Nephi was in essence the instrument of a divine judgment that had become necessary due to Laban's obstinate wickedness and unyielding opposition to God's plan. Sometimes, maybe, the Lord doesn't intervene to part the sea when human agency and a clear command can accomplish the work.
That's a compelling argument regarding Laban's wickedness and persistent resistance, and it's clear his prior actions were deplorable, no question. However, have you considered the immediate circumstances as I mentioned earlier? Laban's character and actions prior to his death were indeed wicked. The text clearly shows that. But at the moment of his death, he was drunken with wine and had fallen to the earth. Nephi was not under immediate threat from an alert, combative Laban. This leads us back to questioning whether other non-lethal means of incapacitating Laban or acquiring the plates could have been pursued. Could the Lord, who maketh rough places smooth and divided waters, not have provided a way to subdue Laban without taking his life? Perhaps by simply making him sleep longer or causing some kind of diversion? Furthermore, Nephi's subsequent actions, donning Laban's garments and imitating his voice to deceive Zoram to gain access to the treasury, though effective in achieving the objective, still point to a reliance on, well, cunning and manipulation rather than exclusively overt divine intervention. This raises questions for me about the holistic moral purity of the entire operation. If the Lord could directly command the killing, Why not simply make the plates appear or cause Laban to disappear, or simply inspire Zoram to comply without deception? This reliance on human cunning suggests that divine will sometimes operates through means that really test our ethical boundaries, and we need to scrutinize those means carefully.
I think that delves into speculation that maybe moves us a bit away from the text itself. The narrative, as given, provides a clear sequence. Laban's wickedness, his refusal to yield the plates, the divine command to slay him, and the explicit rationale for the greater good. While we might hypothetically imagine other ways, the text tells us what did happen, framed as a divine imperative. Nephi's use of Laban's garments and voice, rather than compromising the purity, could perhaps be seen as a divinely guided, practical step necessary to achieve the ultimate righteous purpose, given Laban's position and the security around the plates. It arguably demonstrates divine guidance working through human ingenuity to secure the records, rather than being a deviation from it. The goal was securing the plates for generations, and Nephi used the tools at hand, apparently under divine direction, to ensure that happened.
I understand the desire to stick strictly to the text's account, but part of intellectual exploration is indeed asking those what-if questions, isn't it? Because they highlight the ethical tensions inherent in the narrative. They force us to consider how we interpret divine commands when they appear to clash with fundamental moral tenets that we are also taught are divine. The question of whether this was the only way or merely a way remains central. It challenges us to discern the boundaries of human moral responsibility, even under extreme pressure and divine prompting.
Ultimately, this exploration of Nephi's decision to slay Laban really demonstrates the profound ethical challenges that arise when perceived divine commands intersect with fundamental moral principles. The narrative compels us to consider the weight of stewardship for a future generation and the lengths to which individuals might be called to go to preserve spiritual heritage. From my perspective, Nephi's act can be understood as an act of profound obedience and faith, a difficult choice for the greater good of a nation's spiritual salvation, divinely ordained to secure invaluable records. Without these records, his people would have, according to the text, dwindled and perished in unbelief. Perhaps the core insight here is that in moments of existential spiritual threat, what seems like a transgression of human law can, through a divine lens, become the ultimate act of preservation, fundamentally redefining justice for a greater covenant and future.
And on the other hand, Nephi's initial reluctance and the specific, incapacitating circumstances of Laban's death invite us to scrutinize the ethical implications of overriding personal moral conviction, even under what appears to be such potent spiritual duress. It challenges us to ponder the nature of divine justice and whether such an act, even with its stated beneficial outcome, can be fully reconciled with universal moral laws. For me, the debate illuminates the enduring challenge of how far human agents should extend divine prerogative, urging caution in interpreting commands that seemingly override our most fundamental moral compass, lest we pave a potentially dangerous path for future justifications and perhaps compromise our own moral integrity. This leaves ample room for a nuanced understanding of its implications, forcing us to grapple with the tension between a specific command and broader moral principles.
Indeed. The account truly leaves us to reflect on the complex interplay of divine will, human agency, and moral responsibility. It reminds us that this material offers rich ground for continued contemplation on the intricate path of faith and obedience. It's a story that continues to challenge and illuminate our understanding of divine justice and human action.
A contemplation that, as you say, profoundly challenges and illuminates our own moral compass.